The wind sang low through the pines that winter, a sound like old bones turning in shallow earth. Snow blanketed the land as far as the eye could reach, not the soft kind that begged to be touched, but hard-crusted, bitter snow that whispered warnings under every step. And in the middle of that white nowhere stood a ranch, lonely, weather-worn, the roof hunched like a tired shoulder. He lived there. The man was not old, not yet. 30 by calendar, older by grief. Folks in town called him the quiet one when they bothered to speak of him at all. He rode in once a month for salt, lamp oil, flour. Never whiskey, never sugar. He didn't smile. Didn't linger. Just handed coins over with a nod and rode back out like a shadow slipping behind a cloud. Some said he'd buried his family. Others said they'd left him. A few whispered darker things, that he'd once loved, and lost in a way words couldn't hold. But no one knew. He never answered questions. And no one was foolish enough to press. He spoke to his horse more than to any man. A large roan gelding, steady and quiet like his master. Their breath came in twin clouds on cold mornings as they rode the fence line, checking posts, coiling wire, tending to the forgotten corners of land others had long since abandoned. He mended things with slow hands, gates, tools, broken saddles. But nothing could quite mend him. Until the day he found her. It was late afternoon when he saw the figure, small, unmoving, lashed to his outer fence like some cruel offering to the cold. At first he thought it was a scarecrow. Then a bundle of cloth. Then, as the horse shifted beneath him, he saw bare feet. A dress, pink, torn at the hem, fluttering weakly in the wind. He dismounted slow, careful. The snow crunched loud under his boots, loud in a world that rarely made sound. She didn't look up. Her head was bowed. Long, tangled hair covered her face, strands frozen stiff near the ends. Ropes bit into her wrists where they were tied tight to the post. Her arms hung slack. He half feared she was already gone. But then, a breath. Shallow. Fragile. But there. He knelt, one hand brushing the hair from her cheek. Her skin was raw where the wind had punished it. A bruise, deep purple, bloomed beneath her left eye. Still she didn't flinch. Only her eyelids lifted, just barely, and their eyes met. She didn't scream. Didn't speak. Just looked at him, eyes wide, stunned, as if she hadn't seen another soul in 100 years. He untied her slowly. The rope was frozen stiff. Her arms fell limp, and he caught her before she crumpled into the snow. She weighed near nothing. Her fingers were bloodless, her lips cracked. Still, not a sound. When he carried her toward the cabin, he expected questions to crowd his mind. Who left her? Why here? Why him? But there was only one thought, circling quiet in his chest: she can't survive another night out here. Inside, the cabin was no palace. Wood stove. Single bed. A few shelves. A cracked mirror. Everything smelled of pine smoke and saddle leather. He laid her on the cot near the stove and wrapped her in a quilt stitched long ago by hands now gone. He brewed strong tea and dripped warm water to her lips. Her eyes fluttered, opened again. Still she did not speak. He thought maybe she was in shock. But by the second hour, as he tried to coax warmth back into her limbs, he realized, no. It wasn't shock. She could see him, follow him with her gaze. She understood. But she made no sound. No word. When he tried to speak gently, slowly, her eyes didn't change. She was deaf. He sat back on his heels, elbows on his knees, and looked at her like a man seeing a map he didn't know how to read. A long moment passed. Then, without thinking, he rose, crossed to the hearth, and used a stick to write in the thin layer of ash that clung to the stone. Safe. She looked at the word. Her eyes filled, but still no tears fell. She reached out, one trembling finger tracing each letter. Then, she placed her hand to her chest. Just once. That was all. He nodded. That night, he gave her the bed and took the old chair by the fire. Sleep came slow. The wind howled like a mother mourning, but he did not rise to block it. He watched her instead. Watched her chest rise and fall beneath the quilt. Watched her hands twitch, even in sleep, as if fending off ghosts. In the morning, she did not run. She did not try to flee. She stood at the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the light spill across the land like gold spilled from heaven. Her face remained unreadable, calm, yet hollow. But she turned when he placed bread and boiled eggs on the table. He pointed. Then sat. Slowly, she followed. They ate in silence. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of people who had nothing to prove. Afterward, he tried again, the stick, the hearth, the words. Name? She stared a long time. Then shook her head, almost imperceptibly. Or maybe she didn't understand. Or maybe she simply wasn't ready to offer it. So he wrote again. Hurt you? Her eyes lowered. She nodded once. Then raised her sleeve, showed a bruise as dark as a storm cloud on her forearm. He looked away. Rage was a useless thing in a man like him. He'd learned that long ago. He only wrote once more that day. You stay. Heal. No one comes here ***. She took the stick from him then, and slowly, shakily, wrote. Why help me? He didn't answer in words. He simply rose, took the kettle off the fire, and poured her more tea. That night, she sat near the fire, fingers playing with the fringe of the quilt. He watched from across the room. He didn't ask anything else. Didn't offer her stories. She'd been through enough words that hurt. Instead, he carved a small block of wood, smoothing corners, shaping something simple. A horse. A gift. He would leave it by her bedside in the morning. Before he blew out the lantern, she looked at him. Really looked. Then signed, slow and awkward, hand over heart. He didn't know what it meant. Not exactly. But he nodded just the same. The wind rose again. But it no longer sounded like grief. It sounded like change. And for the first time in 11 years, he spoke aloud into the quiet. You'll be safe here. Not a promise. A vow. And outside, the snow began to fall again, soft now, like a benediction. The days unfolded like pale sheets pulled slow from a cedar chest, quiet, cold, and full of stories left unspoken. Morning came early on the ranch, though the sun rose late. Ice sheathed the barn roof in a brittle shimmer, and the world outside the cabin remained wrapped in snow and silence. She moved carefully through that silence, a soft figure wrapped in wool and weariness. Her steps made no sound. Her hands, always clasped or fluttering, moved with a grace that seemed half-learned and half-born. The man, the rancher, gave her room to be. He didn't press. He didn't pry. He only built routines she could step into if she chose. She chose slowly. The second morning, she stirred the fire before he did. The third, she placed 2 cups on the table, her eyes downcast but her hands steady. He noticed how she folded the napkin over her lap with care, as if dignity could be pieced back together from small habits. And maybe it could. He wrote simple words on the slate he'd found tucked in the barn, left over from some long-abandoned schooling: bread, water, fire, window, ***. She studied each one as though it held a secret code. Then she copied them, one by one, onto the slate's edge. Her handwriting was uneven, shy. But she smiled faintly when she saw him nod. He learned to gesture more, slow movements, open palms, clear eyes. She taught him with patience he hadn't earned. The sign for thank you. The sign for safe. And one day, after she swept the cabin floor from corner to corner, she looked up at him and signed, home? His breath caught. He looked away and didn't answer. But he didn't need to. The fact that she'd asked meant something had shifted between them, from survival to something softer. Still, she did not speak. Not even in humming. Her silence was not a prison, but a country she had learned to live inside. And he found himself learning its language. He began listening with his eyes, to her fingers, to her glances, to the way she would touch the window frame as if counting the days with wood grain. He never asked what had happened to her. Not directly. But one afternoon, as they stood side by side feeding the horses, he drew a line in the dirt near her feet. Then another. Then 3 more. 5 lines total. He pointed to the first. Then to her. Then to the last. He tapped his chest. The question was clear: from then to now, what brought you to me? She knelt slowly. Smoothed the dust. Then drew 3 symbols: a house, a stick figure with arms raised, and a rope. She paused, then added a 4th, a small flower, blooming from the snow. She didn't point to herself or to him. But he understood. The man she'd come from had used her silence as an excuse to be cruel. Had tied her to a post and walked away. And yet, despite all that, she still believed in small things blooming. He carried that image with him for days. In town, the talk had begun to shift. The old widow who ran the post office mentioned she'd seen him with a girl, young and quiet. Sheriff Darnley asked if everything was proper. He didn't answer. Just loaded his wagon with feed and nodded once before leaving. Let them wonder, he thought. Let them speak in corners and squint down trails. The truth lived here now, in soft signs, shared bread, and unspoken kindness. That winter dragged itself across the land like a tired dog, but inside the cabin, warmth grew in unexpected places. She began to hum, not loudly, and not with her mouth, but with her hands, as she stirred broth. With her shoulders, as she moved through the small room in rhythm to a music only she could feel. And he began to laugh again. Just once, quietly, when she caught him spilling coffee and shook her head with mock reproach, lips curving slightly in what could almost be called a smirk. Still, neither of them said what lingered between them. Not yet. One evening, as wind clawed at the shutters and the fire burned low, she picked up the slate and wrote a single word. Stay? He stared at it. The chalk was faint, as if she'd feared the question might be too heavy. But she met his gaze, waiting. He took the slate from her, wiped it clean, and wrote, "If you want." Then, under that, slowly, he added, "I do." She closed her eyes. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she reached forward, took his hand, and pressed it flat over her heartbeat. It was fast. Alive. And he knew, in that fragile moment, that she was giving him something sacred. She didn't know him love. Not gratitude. Not anything. But she was offering trust. That night, as he sat by the fire carving another small horse, this one with more care, more detail, she took the old quilt from the bed and laid it over his shoulders. Then she signed something slowly, using both hands. He didn't recognize the gesture. She did it again, more deliberate this time. He pointed to the hearth, to the stick. She hesitated, then wrote, "Thank you for not asking for anything." He didn't speak. He only reached over and carved a line into the horse's saddle, one line for each of the days she'd been here. 11. He would add more as they passed. The following morning brought a strange stillness. The snow had stopped falling, and the sky was a pale blue, thin as milk glass. She stood at the edge of the porch, face tilted upward, letting the light touch her skin. Her eyes were closed. He stood behind her, watching the wind lift strands of her hair, and he thought, this is what a second beginning looks like. And yet, change never comes without tremors. That afternoon, a rider passed far off, just a speck on the hill, heading toward town. He watched it from the ridge as he chopped wood, feeling unease settle in his stomach. Something told him the world beyond their fence line was stirring. She didn't notice. She was humming again, her hands moving in the kitchen window, slicing root vegetables into thin ribbons. He told himself not to worry. But deep inside, he knew, this quiet couldn't last forever. He watched her that night, curled near the fire, the light dancing across her face. And he thought of the words she'd drawn in the dust, the flower blooming in snow. He only hoped nothing would come to crush it. Not now. Not when it had only just begun to rise. The thaw came slow that year. Winter didn't let go all at once, but in small surrenders, a drip from the eaves, a softening of soil, a bird call heard faintly at dawn. The ranch, buried so long under silence and snow, began to stir in quiet ways. Water ran again in the creek. Hooves sank deeper in the mud. Buds, tight as prayer beads, swelled along the branches. He noticed her steps changed first. No longer cautious, no longer featherlight. She walked with purpose now, grounding each heel into earth that was no longer frozen. In the mornings, she rolled her sleeves to the elbow and took to raking the yard, shoveling out the last patches of ice from beneath the porch, hanging damp linens on lines that trembled in the breeze. She moved like a woman returning to herself. He built her a saddle. Not a grand thing, just a softened leather seat with shortened stirrups, cut narrow across the horn for her small hands. When he led the horse to her that morning, reins in one hand, saddle already secured, she looked at him for a long, still moment. Then she stepped forward and touched the animal's cheek, nodding once. The first ride was short. Around the corral, slow as a drifting cloud. He walked beside her, one hand on the bridle, the other at her knee, steadying. Her posture was rigid at first, but with each pass, her spine eased. By the time they reached the gate, she was smiling, a real one, lips parted, face turned to the sky like a girl remembering summer. After that, they rode often. Out along the ridgeline where the pine trees opened up and the whole valley stretched before them in soft greens and dusty golds. She liked to sign things now as they rode, naming trees, clouds, deer trails, and he did his best to mimic her movements. Sometimes he got it wrong. She'd laugh silently, shake her head, and guide his hands gently, patiently, until the shape was right. He built her a small garden near the side of the house. Turned the soil himself. She chose the seeds. Beans. Carrots. Lavender. The cabin began to smell like new earth and wood smoke, and when she worked with her fingers in the dirt, she hummed again, not with sound, but with motion. A rhythm of planting and hope. He didn't say it aloud, but watching her became the brightest part of his days. One evening, as they sat on the porch with mugs of sweetened tea, she picked up the slate and wrote, "Would you still want me if I never speak?" He didn't write back. Instead, he set down his mug, walked over to her, and knelt, slow, steady. He took her hand and placed it over his chest. His heart, though quiet, beat strong beneath her palm. Then, with both hands, he signed the word she had taught him months ago, home. She blinked fast, as if tears were thinking of coming, but she gave a small shake of her head and wrote again. "I want to be more than a guest." He didn't know how to answer. Not in gesture. Not in writing. So he took the horse he'd carved, the one with the 11 notches, and handed it to her. She traced each line slowly, then looked at him. He signed, "More will come." And she nodded. Spring stretched longer each day. The grass grew high along the fences, and birds made reckless music in the morning trees. She sewed curtains for the windows, repaired the cracks in the porch step. Sometimes, she'd disappear into the barn and return with dust on her cheeks and a grin in her eyes. She found an old lantern and hung it near the garden, just because she liked the way it glowed after dark. He began to feel the ache in his chest lessen. The long cold that had settled in his bones, 11 winters deep, began to thaw. But peace, no matter how carefully tended, rarely comes without its shadows. Word reached the edge of town that a man had been asking questions. Rough voice, whiskey breath, a face lined like cracked leather. The girl's name, the one she had never given, had passed his lips in a saloon, followed by a curse. He claimed she belonged to him. Said she was stolen. Said she was promised. No one in town wanted to get involved. They knew better than to stir up dust where it didn't need stirring. But one woman, a widow who'd always had a kind eye, came quietly to the ranch with her shawl wrapped tight and warned the rancher. "Whatever that girl is to you," she said, "you keep her close. That man's coming. And I don't think he's coming to talk." That night, he didn't tell the girl. Not because he feared her reaction, but because something inside him shifted when he imagined her looking afraid again. He remembered the day he'd found her tied to the post, half frozen and expressionless. He remembered the way she hadn't spoken, hadn't screamed, as if she'd already used up all her fear. He didn't want her to feel that again. Not here. Not after all they'd built. So instead, he checked the locks, counted the rounds in his rifle, and fixed the fence where it sagged near the road, not because he thought it would stop anyone, but because it mattered that things held strong. She noticed his quiet that evening, but said nothing. Only touched his shoulder as she passed behind him, carrying 2 plates of stew. He covered her hand with his for a moment, then let it go. In the dim firelight, she signed. "What is it?" He paused. Then signed back? "Wind's picking up." She tilted her head, curious. He shrugged. "Storm coming," he added. She nodded. "We've been through storms before." He smiled then, despite the unease coiling in his gut. She had no idea what courage looked like, because she wore it so often she mistook it for skin. Later that night, when the house was still and she slept in the bed they now quietly shared, no ceremony, no vows, just 2 hands reaching across linen and meeting in the dark, he sat by the window, rifle across his knees. He knew the man would come. And when he did, the girl would no longer be the one who had been left. She would be the one who had chosen. And he would not let her be taken again. He watched the moon rise, round and silver, and breathed deep into the night. The thaw had come. The earth was soft again. And even if spring brought storm with it, he was no longer the man who waited in silence. He was the one who stood in it. The rider came just after dawn. The sound of hooves cutting through damp earth reached the cabin like a slow drumbeat, long before the figure appeared on the hill. Mist clung low over the fields, and dew glazed the porch rail. Inside, the rancher had already risen. He stood at the window, a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand, watching the speck grow larger. She still slept. The rifle was already leaning by the door, not hidden, just waiting. He hadn't planned what he'd say, not exactly. But he knew the man who rode toward them wasn't coming for conversation. Some men carried anger like a brand across their hearts, and this one had worn his for too long. The girl stirred not long after. Her hair was loose, unbraided, her eyes heavy with sleep. She moved toward the stove, saw his face, and stopped. She didn't need words to know. She signed who? He signed him. She didn't tremble. Didn't pale. She only nodded once, slow and sure, and stepped past him to look out the window. Her shoulders squared. The rider approached with swagger, reins loose, hat pulled low. A second man followed behind, thinner, mean-eyed. And a third, the kind who never spoke unless told. All 3 looked like they'd ridden hard and not slept well. The kind of men who thought ownership and love were the same thing. The girl moved before the knock. She opened the door herself. The man on the porch froze a half step from it, his hand raised. He hadn't expected that. His face twisted, confusion first, then insult. He opened his mouth, but she stared him down, unmoving. He said her name. The name she had never given the rancher. The sound of it, heavy, possessive, ugly, landed in the dust like a stone. She blinked once. Then slowly turned and walked back inside. The rancher stepped onto the porch, rifle across his chest. He didn't raise it. Just held it, casual but ready. "You looking for someone?" he asked. The man spat into the dirt. "I'm looking for what's mine. She's not yours. She was given to me. She's not something to be given." The second man stepped forward, hand near his belt. "Law says." "The law isn't welcome on my land unless it rides with kindness," the rancher said. "And it looks like you left that in town." They stared at one another, 3 men on horses, 1 man on wood. The sun had risen higher now, slicing through the mist, lighting the edge of the field where the fence curved away toward memory. The girl stepped outside again. Barefoot, but tall. Strong in the way survivors are, not in muscle, but in the way they carry their pain without apology. She walked past the rancher, down the porch steps, and stopped at the very place she had once been tied. The fence post. It still leaned slightly from winter's weight. Still bore a faded notch where the rope had bit into it. She reached out and laid her hand upon it. A breath passed. Then she turned to face them. She raised her hands and began to sign. The rancher stepped down beside her and translated aloud. I was left. Not taken. Left. The man on the horse scoffed. You don't get to twist it around. You're mine. She signed again. She belongs to no one, the rancher said. She chooses now. The girl's fingers moved faster, sharper. Her eyes burned with something clean and clear. I lived in silence because I had to. Now I live in silence because I want to. You took my voice once. You won't take my choice. The man shifted in the saddle, unsure. Anger is easier when the other person cowers. But she stood like the earth had rooted itself in her bones. She's mine, he muttered again, weak now. The third man turned his horse and rode off without a word. The second looked at the girl, then the rancher, then back again. Spat in the dirt and followed. The last stayed. But only for a breath longer. He leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrow. You'll regret this. The rancher raised his rifle, not aimed, not threatening, just held. You already do. The man stared. Then turned his horse. The wind carried dust behind them as they disappeared down the ridge. The girl exhaled. Not relief, but finality. She stepped forward, picked up a small rock, and wedged it into the notch of the fence post where the rope had once torn the wood. Then she walked back toward the cabin, not looking back. That evening, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. He brought her tea. She lit the lamp by the garden. The wind was warm, and the porch creaked beneath their chairs. She reached over and took his hand. He looked at her and signed, slow, imperfect. I was alone for 11 years. I thought I needed quiet. But I needed you, She smiled and signed back. And I needed a fence post. His laugh broke something open, not loud, but full. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, gentle as spring rain. Night settled over the ranch. The stars emerged like promises kept. In the distance, coyotes sang to the dark. But inside, there was only peace. The fence still stood. And so did they.